My name is David Sproles, and I'm the president of the New York School of Interior Design. And I just want to say, what an exciting evening! It's great to have you all up here on the stage, and have you all here in the audience. I have to say, I think all of you just came from the gallery space, and I think you can all agree that it is a pretty stellar exhibition. It's actually one of our most successful. I've been here 25 years, and I have to say this has been. Every time I walk through that gallery space, there's somebody in there or a group of people in there, and what makes me most happy is there are students in there. The exhibition is being used as a teaching tool, and a number of our rendering classes, as well as upper-level studio classes, they're in there looking at this work, and that makes me very, very happy. And I have two people to thank for this: the curators of the exhibition, Donald Albrecht and Tom Mellins. Thank you, sir. For those of you who don't know, and I can't imagine you don't know, but these two gentlemen are two individuals who put together the most compelling exhibitions, I think, in New York City related to design. And so we're thrilled to have you here tonight and for being part of the NYSA team with the exhibition. So you met Tom and Donald, and I believe you heard from all of the panelists already, but just as a reminder, in alphabetical order, we have Nina Cooke John, William Georgis, Peter Pennoyer, and Douglas Wright. So I'm going to pass the microphone back to you. And if you'd like to come back and see the exhibition, I can't believe it's closing next week. I feel like it just opened, but it is closing on April 3rd, which I believe is next Wednesday. So come back if you want to see it before it closes. So thank you for being here, and gentlemen, it's all yours.
So what we did the last time, which worked out, is we'll ask a series of questions, and then if we could just go, if each of you could give, an answer of give your comments.
A response.
Some response. Call and response.
Right.
So we would love to know kind of an origins story. The first time you used digital technologies like AutoCAD, what was your first impression of it when you used it, if you use it ever? So Peter, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll jump right in. So I found AutoCAD drawings to be just horrendous the first time we tried them, because we didn't know what we were doing, but we didn't give up. And we decided to just try to stay on the forward edge of every software and admit that it wasn't going to be okay until we really invested a lot of time in it. And Revit's even worse at first, but we get there somehow.
I absolutely despised AutoCAD and all digital forms of drawing. And then one time I was working on a staircase for Bob Stern, and it was an oval stair that had concave steps at the top and convex at the bottom. And it was extraordinarily complicated. And I had a review with Bob, and he said, "This stair is fantastic, but you should flip it and start it on the left side rather than the right." And I went back to my desk, and on AutoCAD, I just mirrored the stair. And I thought, this by hand would have been one of the worst experiences of my life, because it would have taken a week to redraw it. And yet, AutoCAD did it in about a second, so it was great.
In my office, we do use.
I'm so sorry. Heaven calling.
Modern technology interfering again. We do use AutoCAD in my office, and I believe it's a useful tool as long as it's somehow attached to the humans who operate it and understand it.
So while I was an undergraduate, I think in our fourth year, Cornell had a proprietary 3D modeling program, and everyone had to take that studio, but it was actually really novel, and it wasn't until, I graduated and was in my first job out of school that they had to teach us on the job, because we wouldn't have learned in school any kind of computer-aided drawing. And I do remember, though, even when we were first taught how to use this 3D modeling tool, seeing it as a great tool, a new addition to the other tools we had, in addition to model making and hand drawing. But really, I didn't expect that it would completely turn upside down our toolbox in terms of how we would be using it in our collection. So, now it really has become, we are, because of the demands of kind of production and getting things done at a certain time, we do have to take advantage of the ease in which CAD allows us to flip stairs and do it in, 5 seconds versus the kind of detailed and laborious work that might be needed to really delve into something for longer.
Well, picking up on that idea of speed and efficiency and the way that it relates to your creative process, I'm going to go off script and ask you, I was struck when you said that you didn't anticipate the impact that this would have on the industry, that it seemed like an additional tool, but not necessarily that it would become an industry standard. And to go back to this connection between the creative process and the demands of a practice, do you think that ultimately designs are different because of the transformation of the industry? Do you think that it has or it will ultimately affect form, or is it simply a method?
Well, I was also at Columbia at a time when they were doing the first paperless studio, and that's when the term blobitecture came out, when different practitioners were using computer-aided modeling that had originally been designed to use in the automotive industry to then design these buildings that were suddenly very kind of It was before Maya, and I can't remember what it was called, but it was, a precursor to probably Rhino is the closest thing right now. But the architecture that came out during that time in the late 90s, if you remember, was definitely directly linked to the 3D modeling program that we were using at that time.
So interesting. And does anyone else want to respond to that? Do you feel that it's affected form, or that it will ultimately affect form?
I think it will. We're now in Revit mostly, and I think that these programs can encourage you to cut and paste and to take shortcuts, but we just don't do that. We draw every single molding at full scale, and then it goes into the computer. And you just have to be disciplined about it and stay in touch with the scale. However, in the virtual 3D goggle world, I'm astonished to see and disappointed that you do get a better sense of the scale of the room than you do even in renderings, in computer-generated renderings. So there's great promise in it. And for me, the greatest promise is going directly from design to production, cutting out shop drawings and all that, and being able to give data to someone making something that allows them to fabricate, which we do with hardware. So we don't send hardware drawings to our hardware manufacturer, we send an email.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, you never know how technology is going to affect things. It is a realm of ideas. Architecture always is. If you think of classical architecture, it was done with T-squares, and then it was done with May lines, and it's been done with CATIA, I think is the software you were talking about. But the technology, when it flips over to the other side of driving what is done, that's when I try to interject myself, definitely with people in my office, just because I don't like the idea of being limited by the technology. And so I think if all you're doing is sort of using the technology to drive the ideas, you're not going to end up with a great design.
So I'm wondering, can you give us the name of an interior designer or architect of the past who did hand drawings, who you greatly admire, and tell us briefly what you admire about his or her work, other than Paul Rudolph, of course.
Down the line.
Sure. No,
Do you want me to start? Okay, so there are so many, but Whitney Warren comes to mind because he captured the majesty of the south facade of Grand Central Terminal, and it's a fantastic drawing. It has notes about things that need further attention, which I love because it's a working document. But his drawing for a section through a house over on 63rd Street has the curtains drawn in color. It has the trim on the curtains. It has the furniture. It has the stair. It's a very lively and, you know, almost muscular drawing of the whole thing. You've sliced through this fantastic house, and he cares about every detail.
I like the drawings of William Walcott, who did. He was one of the renderers that Edwin Lutyens used. He was a great British architect, and I think the drawings very concretely convey sort of the majesty of the buildings, but there's an incredible economy to it too. I mean, his pencil lines, it's just enough to suggest it, and yet these are incredibly detailed buildings. But he also brings, I mean, it's just they look incredibly easy and like they were done just dashed off, but obviously they weren't. But it's amazing what he can accomplish with just color and an incredible economy of line.
I'm a big fan of Louis Kahn's drawings, the architect, and particularly his travel drawings, and also the drawings of his buildings and the connection between the two. His great interest in antiquity, and his drawings reflect that interest, and there's kind of an atavism to it, a primordial quality to the drawings and their connections to the past.
I've always really loved Zaha Hadid's drawings, just in how they're able to capture the expressiveness of what she's hoping to do with the architecture. But she also had a separate set of drawings that were relatively abstract, and those abstractions, I think, fed into the architectural work, and they're really quite beautiful. I also, though, love the drawings of, and have been really influenced by the drawings of Diller Scofidio in terms of how they layer line drawings, pencil work with collage, and how those become the conceptual base again for later work.
Could I, no, I mean, not object, but I mean, I love, you know, Zaha's drawings were exceptional, but her famously first published work, which is that competition in Hong Kong, architectural, progressive architecture, published the drawing upside down.
Because they couldn't make head nor tail out of it.
When we were speaking to participants in the show about why they continue to make hand drawing so central, one of the answers that came up over and over was clearly size and scale and proportion are critical elements of architecture. They seem particularly important in terms of interior design, interior architecture. And over and over, practitioners would say that they felt more sensitive to those issues, you know, down to details about the distance between the seat that you're sitting on and the floor, the distance between your chair and the table, the proportions of the room, that they were more sensitive to those issues when the idea was traveling through their body. What contemporary educators would call embodied knowledge. And I'm wondering if you can tell us anything about that, about the sort of physical experience and how that relates to your thought process, and if you think it relates, or if that doesn't ring true to you.
Start down here. Okay, so I think that it's impossible for me to imagine the scale, the correct scale, the human scale of a molding or a detail of a wall or a facade if I'm not sketching it. I think it's really difficult on a keyboard to maintain that connection to scale. I can't imagine if you walk by the new J.P. Morgan headquarters rising up like some alien spaceship at 48th Street, that was actually, that came out of, you know, who would draw that? It's just shocking.
Somebody was punching the buttons. I think that the great thing about drawing is that it just makes an economy of everything. So just with the dash of a pencil, you've represented however many feet or inches or whatever it is you're doing. Whereas in all computer drawings, you're building at an actual scale. Like you're supposedly building at full size. You never are, and it's contained within a TV screen. But there's just a dissociation that makes it impossible, I think, to understand scale. Whereas I agree with Peter. I mean, the drawing of it is very much felt and known, especially after you've been doing it a long time. Like you can represent things and you know how large they are. I don't know. Maybe it's still in your mind. It's in your mind rather than the TV screen, I think.
Bill?
For me, the importance of drawing is really to connect my mind and my spirit through my hand to the paper, and that can be depending on the state of mind I'm in, you could pick that up and how it's transmitted through the hand. So if I'm in an elated state, I can see it. I can go back to a drawing done a week or two before where I maybe wasn't in an elated state, and I can read that as well. So, there's something about the sensitivity and the connection to spirit through the hand that is somehow flattened through the keyboard.
Yeah, I think similarly, drawing is visual thinking for me, actually getting out of my head some of the ideas, and they need to land on paper through my hand for me to connect directly with them. And, I was in architecture school in a time where going through multiple options really quickly was really important. And so to be able to do that intuitively, kind of sort through different ideas, but then in the later stages, in the refinement stages, a similar connection with the kind of inherent concept that you're holding within your body, and through your own hand being able to refine and express it, which I think, even though we have to do very practical things with the computer, for me to figure it out, I need to print it out and then draw on top of it, even if we have the bones of it. Otherwise, I think what ends up being produced on the screen is just too abstract.
Without dating anyone, do you think that this is true for younger people, or for young people who have always had the option of using computer assisted? Do you think that they still feel the same way that you do? Like when you said it, you can't imagine someone drawing that. Is that a feeling shared by very young people in your experience or not?
Yes, I think they fundamentally feel, under even the ones who are very confident in their abilities, a bit of unease with creating digital screen images that seem divorced from the physical world, and I think there's an uneasiness. They like some of the tools. We now have AI-assisted clash detection because the engineers are putting in their structure in our models in Revit as we're doing the design, and now the computer circles a conflict between a steel and a wall or a step in red, and it sends an email to one woman in my office. I don't know why she gets all the conflicts, but so they appreciate those things, but there's an unease about the design part.
Really interesting.
I'd be interested to know what material you are most comfortable working in. You've talked about, the hand to the paper. Is it watercolor? Is it pencil? Is it pen? What feels best as you draw? What material do you use? Or materials do you use? Why don't we start with me and go back?
We're going to mix it up. So I like pencil when I'm doing purely, black and white drawings. I like to use the pencil because of, it responds to the weight of your hand again. It can get darker, lighter, depending on how fast you're drawing. Old school, when we're using mechanical pencils, or, you twist it, you get a different line than if you draw straight across. So it's very, very, very versatile using the same lead. We used to use an F lead, and that could do so many things. And in other work I layer in collage, but when it's purely drawing, I like to use pencil.
All media, really. Pencil, pen, colored pencil, watercolor, mainly with textile design. It's watercolor, and architectural and interior design with pencil and pen.
I mean, my favorite is watercolor by far. I think it depends a lot on what you're trying to say and do. I mean, if I need an immediate strong impact, I'll use pen and color just because it creates it grabs the viewer. Pencil is a lot softer and more subtle. You can do a lot more with it, and then light washes. But my favorite by far is watercolor, and then there's the paper. I mean, hot press versus cold press, rough, all those things. So.
Can you talk just very briefly, elaborate a little bit more about why watercolor is most compelling to you?
It took a long time to learn to do this, but I really love letting the paper do the work. I had a teacher tell me to do that, and I really didn't get it until I just kind of stopped painting and watched the color dry. And when you start doing that and see what the color will do, what kind of edge it will give you, or the density of the color and what that can convey, that's a great moment in painting. And just to have that happen on paper as well, just in terms of making something, it just becomes very expressive, or it's a skill that you learn and then you can use it in your drawings. So, yeah.
Nice, thank you.
I like using a razor tip felt tip, and if it's a renovation or an alteration of an existing building, I find drawing over the floor plan of the existing house and then finding the new parts puts it in my mind in an odd way. But I'm happy that I suffered the torture of drawing using rapidographs, which no one's even heard of. 000 rapidographs on Mylar, which is a nasty material. And then I took drafting courses in Paris, believe it or not, which with a reservoir with detachable nibs on paper, which is disastrously risky. So I'm glad I did those things, but I just prefer the felt tip.
Right.
Actually, as an aside, talking about paper, I know the man who recently retired, who was the design director of Knopf Publishing, and he gave me the last hot type book that the firm had done. It was a Diana Vreeland autobiography. And hot type means they actually set little pieces of iron. And the difference on a piece of paper embedded in all slightly different, just made the page electric. And if you look at non-hot type, what they do now, it simply does not have that electric dynamic quality that the hot type has. And it's got a lot to do not just with the type, it has to do with the paper that the type is going into.
May I just, a little blast from the past, and it's off topic, but I think germane to this conversation. I spent 1 year at the Illinois Institute of Technology, which was a school that Mies van der Rohe taught at and really kind of made noteworthy. And when I was there, it was, 1976, 1977. And there was a woman who taught there who was a protege of Mies, and I recall her name was Madame Chang. That's what we called her. And you were in Crown Hall, which is this ice-cold building of Mies's drafting, terrazzo floors, all glass, in the Chicago winter. And they taught us to draft, and we were instructed to use wooden pencils, and we weren't allowed to use sharpeners. We had to whittle away at the wood, and then we had blocks of sandpaper where we had to actually sand and sharpen the pencil itself, and then we would draft. And the drafting exercises were exercises that Mies himself had prescribed for his students. And she would come around, and you had to turn the pencil in a specific way to maintain consistent line quality across, and the corners, the interstices, everything had to be flawless. Otherwise, she would chastise you publicly in front of everybody else. And so you really learned how to draw perfectly. And then, of course, I left there, and people weren't using pencils like that any longer. But it's apropos of what Peter was talking about.
Yeah. And for another time, I actually went through the whole program. I did all 5 years of it. I actually started the September after Mies. Mies had died in August, and I started in September. And it was really about craft in many ways, like the pencil issue, that you had to sort of start it and carve it. And we did this incredibly interesting exercise where you would take a piece of Strathmore board and you'd wet it, and then you would drip a watercolor on it, and it would make various shapes. I mean, people who think Mies is like a technician are completely wrong. He's a complete artiste in many, many ways. But I ended up doing, I think, it was a 5-year program. We didn't design a building until the 4th year. It was all these exercises.
To prepare you.
To prepare you.
It was punitive.
Yeah. See, we have different, actually, now that I think of it, you remained an architect. I did not.
And I lasted 1 year. I couldn't deal with it.
Can you talk a little bit about your clients' reactions to hand drawing versus computer renderings, how they feel about the process? We talked a little bit about that in the gallery space, but what are some of your observations as to how the different methodologies communicate to people who are not trained as architects, the clients?
I mean, they seem increasingly younger clients amazed that there are people in my office who actually, paint and draw and, make things by hand. They think, on one hand, I think see me as a bit of a dinosaur, but then when they see younger people doing it, they see there's an optimism and engagement, and they want to keep them, and I don't let them keep them.
And a humanism, too.
Definitely the humanism, yeah. I mean, there's that sense of, Gregory's, Gil Martin, who's the design genius in my office, draws just with a very hard lead on trace, so his drawings are very faint, and so that's a bit of a challenge. So we have to enrich them. We use Photoshop to try to make them read darker, and he did an analytique for a wall inside the Warhol factory, the last Warhol factory on 31st Street, and it didn't come across, so we did a reverse figure ground. So it was a black sheet with these little white lines. But his lines were so perfect that we made it 4 times real actual size, and it still worked.
I'm not sure how. I don't know. I mean, I know that for the longest time, I didn't even show my generative sketches to clients, just because I thought they were a little too bizarre or wouldn't get them. But I did have this one great client who looked at me after I'd made the presentation and said, "You're not telling me something, I can tell." And so I pulled out this drawer of drawings, and it actually was a lot of fun. I mean, we went through it, but you never really know which client's going to be ready to look at these things, I mean, that's one of the hardest things I find of renderings. Like Peter's beautiful renderings are very clear and understandable, and a lot of times you don't know if someone can understand it or make the transfer. So.
I think it's the most important way to connect with people, and if they see drawings that were made specifically for them, it's like a heart-to-heart exchange, and it's really powerful, and I think people really respond to that.
We definitely have that challenge of what to show and what not to show, because many of the early drawings and sketches are possibilities, right? It could be this, it could be that, and they're really gestural. And they're great for us within our team as inspiration. But sometimes we actually find if we generate drawings or 3D models that we need to sketch on top of it because those look a little too perfect and final. And we're still really early in the design stage, and we don't want the client to think that this is set. So we end up sketching on top of it and showing them the sketch so that they read it as being conceptual and not yet finished. So it goes both ways for us.
Yeah, very interesting. I think we're now going to open it up to questions from the audience, and someone will come around with a microphone so that we can all hear your question.
How about Janet?
Thank you very much for your all your comments. It's really great, since I was the architectural drawings curator, to see people really excited about the drawing. But if you read about neural pathways in the neurological field, one of the things they found about the old rote learning was the repetition of making letters strengthened people's neural pathways. Your neuroplasticity is getting stronger when you're drawing. And so I'm wondering, do you have any, I should make you feel better, but do you have any response to that? That may be part of what your connectivity to the process is.
Do you want me to jump in?
Sure.
So yes, I mean, I'd say that if I go through, and it doesn't happen a lot because I run my firm too, but if I go through hours of drawing something, I'll actually dream about that. It leaves something in my head. It's very strange. It's not unpleasant, but that may be what you're talking about.
Well, yeah, and I know none of the science, but I definitely feel a lot better when I'm drawing. I mean, it just, after a day of drawing, that's a great day when I can take time to do that.
And I think I may have mentioned earlier, actually the drawing allows me to build a project in my head. So I can walk through a space, I could smell it, I could see the light, I can feel it. And there are projects that haven't been realized, but they're still in my head. So I feel that it's not for naught, that there's something there that's of value still.
And it's definitely very meditative in terms of you need to kind of focus on the job at hand, because you are directly connecting that pencil to paper and working through, and it's less easy to get distracted when you're kind of in that space.
Meditative, yes, and also frustrating, because often the creative process is painful.
Yes.
And you don't have an answer to a specific problem, and the drawing is helping you find that answer. And so you're hitting a wall and you become frustrated. I'm talking about myself. I get frustrated, and then I go, oh my God, I'm terrible. What am I doing? I can't do this. And then you just keep going at it, and then you find an answer. And
yeah, because
so
sometimes there's something in your head, and then you draw and you're like, that's not it. And then you try it again and you're like, that's not it either. And you kind of keep working through that by drawing it, because you're imagining, which is why I find it so important to get things on paper and draw it, because what it in your head is not necessarily the same thing that emerges on paper.
Yeah, so there's ecstasy and also the frustration and the pain of the creative process.
Is that similar? Is that the same if you're working on the computer, or in some ways are you more in touch with the pain and the glory of the creative process when you're drawing, both the positive and the negative?
I've never worked on a computer, so I don't know.
Ah.
I think for me, it's less intimate.
Yeah.
When I'm working through those ideas, using CAD, than if I'm doing it on paper.
Doug, did you have a thought that you wanted to add?
No, I was going to say, we have a saying in the office, and it's called the partner's pen, because that's how a partner avoids getting into the nitty-gritty. You just kind of draw something and pass it off, and someone else figures out that actually this will never work, and it gets returned to the partner.
Yes. There.
Thank you so much for your thoughtful answers. As a student, so I'm currently a bachelor's in interior design at Pratt Institute, and our learning starts right off from the computer. And I have a fine arts background, and I really love just whatever you guys discussed today, just the intimacy of using the pen and the paper, and that's always stuck to me. But the deadlines and the assignments that we get at schools now are designed for the computers, and to be able to do that on paper by hand would be like a nightmare.
But you're going to be out of school at some point. You can forge your own path.
That's true, but but like you said, the industry standards are set, and I'm honestly envious of you guys' education and the way you were taught, because there's so much value in that. So what are your advice for someone who's a student and learning right from the computer?
My advice is to sketch when you're not in class, when you're on vacation, and sketch always. And then in your professional life, I think it's really important to help clients understand. I mean, it unfortunately does come down to fees and time and getting paid for your time. And if you're not educating your client about why they might pay a little more than some other firm, and we would take out our drawings and show what we produce. We show all the concept drawings, we show the working drawings, and we say, this is what we think it takes to make this beautiful. There are other architects who do it for with half this number of sketches, and they're great people, but this is our process. So part of it is standing up for the profession of interior design and insisting that people compensate you and understand the value that you bring by drawing. But they have to pay you to do it, right? So it's,
I think
it's
the important
value
thing
proposition.
the important thing for you to understand is all the people up here have figured out a way to integrate the drawing process, hand drawing process, with production as well, and have a modicum of success, some more than others, but it's possible, and I don't think there's one way to do this. And the important thing, I think, is at the generative stage, at the very beginning, to use your hands. You're a fine artist. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely draw every day. If you don't, like, have a sketchbook and do your 10 or 15 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever you have, do that. But the other thing I found was that, a lot of conveying an idea is just being convincing about it. So I don't know the curriculum you're speaking about, but sometimes I just wouldn't do all the drawings that were quote unquote required, because if you have a compelling drawing that conveys the idea, usually in a jury, they're going to focus on the idea. They're not going to come down on you because you didn't draw off all 4 elevations or something, usually. I mean, I hope. It's worth a try. See how it goes.
Okay, well, let's do one more question. Yes. Yes.
It's not really a question, but I'm hearing that the private drawings that you're doing and not using the computer makes an emotional contact between what you're designing for the client, and that's just a richer end result. And so I think that's one of the most important things that I've heard this evening.
Thank you.
So we do have time for one more question.
Okay, so I'm also in this industry on the vendor side, and recently I've had a little bit more time to sort of do some more creative drawing, writing, other things. And what I'm interested in hearing from you guys after all of these questions you've answered is some specific moments, cathartic moments, when you were drawing for work, outside of work, but, a specific story as opposed to sort of generalities of the work, more like a moment as artists that was an aha or meaningful to you personally or for your firm.
Do you want me to start? So the client was an artist, and he did these free floating lines, and the store he rented wasn't square. It kind of wasn't a triangle, but it was a strange shape. And the moment of just drawing a crazy curve that connected one end of the store to the other in a sinuous curve was kind of, it felt like a high, right? And only one person, a newspaper you wouldn't have heard of called the Village Voice, reviewed this store and said it's a Beetle boot in plan. I was so proud. And the artist was Keith Haring, and he was able to paint it all in flowing lines. So my curve worked with his curve.
That's wonderful.
I was in a Frank Lloyd Wright house, and I was sitting in a room doing a drawing, and I don't think I would have understood his design in quite the same way if I had just looked at it. The drawing I did ended up, he had this long band of ribbon windows, and the house was on just below the brow of the hill, of course, and you couldn't see the ground and you couldn't see the sky, but it looked through these windows at trees. And so it ended up being like a Japanese screen, and this frame with birches. And I don't think if I had, the drawing made me understand it in a different way.
That's hard to answer this, but I guess I have to say something. I guess I can talk about, there's a watercolor I did in the exhibition. It's for a collector of pre-Columbian antiquities in California, and I was designing a rug for his living room, and in the room, some of his work was being displayed in there. And so, it was a conundrum how to approach it and how to make a rug for somebody like that in a room like that, as well as with the interiors and all the furnishings and everything else. And so part of the way it worked was actually just sitting with images of his collection and with watercolor brush and watercolor and working through a number of different ideas and keep going at it and going at it and going at it. And, it was much more abstract. And as it evolved, it became more representational, and I was a little concerned about that and kept pushing it. And then in the end, it is what it is, which is an amalgam of abstraction and representation, and it worked out okay. But it's the process itself that you're problem solving as you're doing it. You're connecting inside here to that, and that's really what it's about. And being able to stand outside of yourself and observe that and let it go, as you say, let the paper, let the medium also, which is the participant in it. It's not just me. It's, it's how the prismatic color reacts to the tracing paper, how the watercolor is absorbed in the artist's paper is also part of this whole thing, as well as the energy of the client, all of it. There's something kind of mysterious and mystical about all of it.
So I'm not sure if this counts because, my working with my hands includes drawing, but it also includes 3D model making. And so for this one sculpture project that I was working on it's now in the courtyard at the Marriott headquarters, I had sketched this idea of this kind of two interlocking pieces, and I had sketched it through and then trying to get, my team to actually model it and kind of get it right, take it from the sketch to the 3D model and represent it, and it just really wasn't happening. And so what I did was, with two pieces of wire, I essentially bent the two shapes and then twisted them into the 3D form that I knew that it needed to be, and I needed to create it in space for it to be really really well represented digitally, because it was, the tweaks that they were making and the responses, I could mark it up and try to get it to do, but until I actually created it in 3 dimensions, we wouldn't have been able to produce it.
So this is actually the last program in relation to this exhibition. It closes April 3rd. And I think just Tom and I wanted to say this has really been a collaborative process. We really want to thank everybody here at the New York School of Interior Design. The designers and the architects have given us tremendous time in addition to lending things. Some people had the work framed themselves. I mean, we'd be here for weeks if I told you the work everybody did with us to put this show together, and I really want to thank everybody that we worked with, both here at the school and everybody on the stage.
And we want to thank all of you for coming tonight. There will be time to talk to the practitioners if they can stay a little bit longer, and to us. And so I'm going to do as the Russians used to do and applaud you. Thank you again.